It's always great to be the near last person to join the meeting here, and it's really hard to see you. These lights are really, really bright up here. I'm going to spend 30 minutes. We're going to go through this very quickly, and I want to just acknowledge all of you for taking the time this week to invest in this learning. You know, I've been with Dell for about a year and a half, and we joined primarily to begin the software strategy, and we now, if you are not aware, Dell has made significant investments in software and has a new line of business around our software group. I spent some time here with some of you talking, and I have to say last night was quite an experience, and I've had a chance to, be in Mumbai and spend some time there, and speaking to Nelish, in fact, just a few moments ago around his taxi company, and Sebastian earlier around the creative work that he does. And, both of them point to something, that it's about how you support your business with IT, and that, once you start putting in place how you approach your organization, it's not so much from a technology view, but it becomes more from a business view. And that's part of something I think that's really interesting for us to look at as IT professionals. So today I'm going to take you through a very quick overview of Dell's security strategy, and I'm going to ask you to help me out at the end. We have made some significant investments in this area, and we believe our vision and strategy is very sound. At the end of the presentation, I like to ask you if a concept resonates with you or if you think it does not. I want you to be part of the design of how we go to market in essence. So you're my survey group when it's all over. So we know that the other part about going last is many of the slides have already been presented, so I'm going to go very quickly through that. And you know that analytics and mobility and virtualization and collaboration, these are top priorities as senior executives in IT organizations around the world. And so we see big gaps that we can play in this area. And so you'll see major investments and strategies that Dell's putting in place that you may not have thought of Dell before. You might have thought of us as a provider of hardware. We are now moving rapidly into the area of investing in software capabilities. There's a part of security that's interesting. Recently there was a intrusion to the U.S. CIA and some of the intelligence. We've also seen some entry into a billing system where 500,000 credit cards were stolen. And there's a young gentleman by the name of Cosmo. And Cosmo sits in his mother and grandmother's house, and he's in his bedroom, and he's a very nice kid. And he does great work. He doesn't go out. He doesn't cause any trouble. But he's a social hacker, and he's one of the most world-renowned hackers in the world. And so we have found that more and more social engineering becomes a hobby. So there's always this view of threats becoming very key to how you manage the business of security. But I also believe that it all centers around the data, the user, and if you think about integration of the life cycle of an end user, whether it be internal or external, it's all about how do you manage the life cycle of that access, governance, and how do you make sure that the data you have is protected, secure. In fact, we had an architectural firm in the United States, and one of the secretaries was very angry at her boss, and she downloaded all the architectural diagrams and took them to a competitor, and so you can see the implication of losing data in a very quick way. So today, very quickly, I'll cover the security landscape. Most of this you already are aware of, and then we'll talk about Dell's security vision and strategy. So security is complex, but it boils down into two basic fundamental needs, is how we see this today. One is we want to protect sensitive information, and we want to maintain business operations. And I'll tell you why this is important. It's important because you need to protect your data, and you need to make sure you're mitigating your risk in doing so. And you also want to maintain your business operations. Sometimes as an executive in IT, your job is not always just to look good. Your job is also not to look bad, right? So in part of this, it's about innovation. And so if you can take and protect your business and maintain your operation, it's around really driving innovation. So business infrastructure is becoming more complex. We talked already this week around convergence, cloud, mobility, big data, and a number of moving parts. And I know that there's many different opportunities you have to use this within your organization. The threats are growing at a changing rapid pace. In fact, we spend with one of Dell's counterintelligence threat units, we monitor over 32 billion threats per day around the world. Governance and management is still at risk, and sometimes when you look at in the country of India, you have regulations that you have to follow. So does many other countries, national regulations, compliance regulations, industry regulations that you have to maintain. So you know what those are. And then those are the external influences, and then you have this other influence which is internal, which is around limited budgets. It's around the legacy environment that you have that relies much on a perimeter-based strategy. So this is what we see around the area of security. And then when you look at business infrastructure, it's oftentimes focused on what are the converging forces. In the market today, you hear many conversations around convergence. Convergence in technology, convergence in process, convergence in people. And what we see here is a convergence of many different things at the same time. No other point in my career have I seen so much come at us so quickly that is so challenging to manage. And so you want to be able to put in place a methodology and a process so that you can protect your business and protect your data in light of all these significant requirements coming to your business and being requested of you. So security, performance, ease of use, manageability, all of these things are questions and problems you have to face when your end users or your business needs to grow. And so this is where we believe this is a significant area for all of us to spend time with. When you start looking at security threats, you think of the intrusion at the edge. You think of all the threats that happen within computers, viruses, and all these other things that happen in time. But as you move forward, now there's more threats. There's more intrusions. There's denial of service attacks, SQL ejections, all the way down into today's world where you see areas like cyber terrorism, you see espionage, you see financial gain. There's so many access points depending on your business. And Sebastian mentioned something to me today too, which is a really interesting point, which was you also need to take and look at your risk tolerance. So when you paint the picture of all of the threats, yes, they're out there, and yes, we can all be at risk. But then your business also, as you think about your business, you have to think about the risk tolerance you have and what are the real threats that are posed. So when you look at Aircell as an example in India and the work that the CSO, who recently, 4 years ago, started their security operation, it was all focused on what can we do to provide compliance. Axis Bank in India also hired a chief security officer, and his primary objective was to change the culture of the bank to think of security as not an afterthought, but as a part of the process of thinking of the business applications they're deploying. So governance and risk management are global concerns. We no longer live in a small country where we operate in our own world. This is an interconnected world where we all work together. And part of the exercise here in just having all of you interact, I mean, that's how we have to operate globally to make sure that we're all connected on these different areas that we do business. I was with the Citigroup executives a few weeks ago, and much of what I talked about here, and I hope you would say the same thing, is that all of the things I'm presenting here, if you did not know these were important, you wouldn't be in the seats that you're in today. But what I want to do today is have you look at where Dell is taking our security vision in light of all of these things that we see coming at us on a continuous basis. So we have limited budgets, and so we have security to solve concerns, but how do you manage all of this change that happens in your world? And so there's gaps. And this is where if you have a very tight auditing policy and a governance policy in your business, oftentimes what will happen is you'll find gaps, and those gaps can create risk. And so the question for you is, what's the gap analysis and the assessment that you make in your applications, in your user access, and the rights of the users to have that happen? Then you have the whole legacy environment. How many of you still operate in a legacy world, in a mixed world? A mainframe with different data centers? How many of you still have legacy applications in play? I'm going to assume that some of you are just very advanced, and then there's also a lot of legacy systems in place. Well, it's a layered security model where there's a new threat that comes through, And then you deploy a new technology, and then you add another layer. And so we're trying to get away from this layering architecture that almost becomes redundant and makes it very challenging to manage and creates this very complex infrastructure. So part of our job in delivering capabilities to your business is we want to simplify technology and IT. We want to help mitigate your risk, but most importantly is to kind of help you accelerate the results of where you have to go. So the Dell approach here, and this is where I want to start getting you into a concept here. You know, if you think of Dell and the business we're in, we've been in the client business, our PC business for some time. We've been in the server business. We're in the networking business and the storage business. We're also in software and services. When you think of all these different components from the endpoint down to the converged infrastructure and every layer in between, you're seeing a collapse of convergence across the platforms. If you think about the process of securing and protecting your environment, it's also about collapsing and converging that strategy. So I want to introduce to you the concept of converged security, because I believe the next generation organization has to look at things from the end user down into the core infrastructure and every process that happens in between, from a request that's made all the way down to the request that's provisioned. If I want to check my travel reservations, my bank balance, or check inventory, I want to be able to do that from a mobile device. I want to make sure that every step of the process is secure, protected, and I'm authorized to get access to that information. So in this new world, a new threat comes in, and you have an integrated architecture that really helps manage an environment and that allows you to create a converged security strategy to manage the world around mobility, cloud, also converged infrastructure, and then with the evolution of big data. So what we see here now is security solutions that don't just do their job, but that work together. So let me just take you through an example. I have to advertise a new XPS. I think I saw a couple of them today. But let's say I'm in India and I need to go check my personal bank account. You would think that whether you do it from your laptop or your cell phone, and this is maybe so fundamental to many of you, but I want to walk you through all the things that have to happen in the process of making this very simple request. I want to check my bank balance. So first you want to make sure that MDM is not data management in this case. It's around managing the mobile device. So the request is made. That's a web service request. It's a request off of a portal. It's requesting through my user ID and password. The first thing that happens is I have a perimeter defense system. And that perimeter defense system does the policy enforcement at the edge. It does threat protection, threat monitoring. It does all of these things around device patching to make sure that the device you're using has the access rights to the application you're trying to get access to. You also want to, in this process, start removing the security inside the application, because that's where it gets really redundant. You want to have a security policy base that is separated from the application. You want application developers to build the systems that support your business to run and innovate and grow. You want security-focused organizations in your company to concentrate on what are the security policies that need to be enforced. And oftentimes, it's the analysis of what the business is that you're doing that you want to make sure that the security policies are governed by the business users, because the business user ends up understanding what is the business interaction that they're having with that end user. So this is how applications and security and end users work together in concert so they can all sort of create a separation of control, separation of execution. So in this case, the next step is the perimeter defense system. I'm checking the policies at the edge. So before anybody gets to go inside my front door, because my front door is locked, someone just knocked, and now I'm letting them in because not bringing anything bad. But now I want to make sure I know who they are. And so in this case, my checking balance simple request, I'm going to go check that I am who I say I am, and that I have the right identity verification, that I have the authorization to get access to the bank balance system in the back core infrastructure. These are all policies. Everything is a policy enforcement point. I want to make sure that the compliance is enforced. I want to make sure that the privacy and assurance and the credentials are all established. So through an identity access management system and governance model, I have access rights to get to the back-end core. And then the back end is the infrastructure, which is everything you're running to store your business, your information, your data, your applications, your intellectual property, which is what everyone wants access to. It's where my credit card information is, where my bank information is. It's how you interact with your end users, whether it be suppliers, customers, or partners. If you think of all of this, just making a simple request of checking my bank balance, every one of these systems checks has to go through and be enforced along the path of the policy that you're putting in place as a security structure. So we talk about, and we've made investments, and we've made $5-6 billion in investments, but the point is, we want to embed security at the endpoint. We want to detect and protect at the edge. We want to make sure we're protecting within the core so that before you have access to that application, we're providing the right checks for you to get access, and then we're also making sure we're embedding and protecting. Even backup and recovery is part of your protection strategy. You need to be able to recover that data in case of a disaster. So these are all part of the security in action. I wanted to point this out. This is just a simple flow, but if you think about it, every one of these things that we do at Dell is supporting each one of these layers. So as you go back and you study your environment and how your applications flow, if you have to do threat protection at wire speed, there's things like firewalls. If you need to make sure that vulnerabilities are checked outside the organization before they even get entered into your business, there's a service to manage security. And then if you want to manage identity and access, there's also a way to do that. So these are things that you probably do today, but I want to make sure you understand this is how we see the flow of data so that we can respond back to that end user. So our converged strategy is around 4 key tenets. One is around embed, so that we embed security into the devices and solutions that we build. So this integrated platform, down into the servers, out to the desktop, out to the client. We want to be able to provide access and security to the endpoint device. With the BYOD movement, it's not going to be just one particular type of access point. It'll be a laptop, a desktop, a tablet, a cell phone, different models. It doesn't matter. All of them are going to have access to your data. It's about protecting the sensitive information that sits behind your organization's walls, which is how do I give organizations or people or individuals access to this information, because that's how I grow and innovate and give them the experience that they expect, but do it in such a way that my sensitive information is protected. So maybe I might put in place something where I have a time-based privilege account access. So let's say you just have something where, I need access to this information. That example I showed you around the architectural documents that were stolen, that would never happen. She would not have to have access of that if we had some type of privileged information that was controlled. Detecting, making sure that as these threats come into your organization, these capabilities to detect these threats are managed on a real-time basis, and then being able to respond back to your organization, your monitoring systems, your business users, or the end user who's not authorized to get access. So these are the things that we're seeing around the concept of converged security. So we talk about embed, sign BIOS, cloud security. We have a very large supply chain. Dell's a complex organization too. We have 110,000 employees. We have a very complex supply chain. We have employees around the world. We work with 100,000 plus customers. We have a very complex IT structure to manage ourselves. And so we have a very big, robust infrastructure to manage our own environment. So many of these capabilities that we deploy, we make sure we use as well. So these are things that we do as a business. Protecting is around backup recovery, identity and access, desktop virtualization, patch management. We're working on a project right now where we're converging Sonic Wall, the firewall, with our case solution to be able to provide a mobility management platform for data protection at the endpoint and access to applications. So you're seeing Dell make more and more investments in R&D and combining these technologies that we've invested in, because we haven't bought technologies just for the sake of the customer base. We bought the technology because of the capability and the vision that we have around what we're trying to accomplish. The interesting part for Dell is that we don't have any legacy. We never had software, right? We had servers, we had storage and networking. And the nice part about building a new software business is we get to build from the ground up. And so we get to take some innovation and build from this strategy, and we believe that gives us some competitive differentiation. So I would ask all of you to at least consider a briefing on what is Dell doing around software, and maybe there's an opportunity where you see a gap that we can help you. When you look at detecting, we have an organization we invested in, SecureWorks, which has an amazing vulnerability assessment group that does consultative work, but also manages and monitors threats around the world. We have consultants that all they do, an entire large group, 3,000 professionals, just looking at threats that come from all over the world. So we have a very significant investment. And then the respond, we have digital forensics and response services that come to play. So again, embed, protect, detect, and respond. Those are the 4 tenets that we're coming to market with around our core security strategy. And so when you look at the big picture, today convergence happens within the very specific domains, but we see this entire convergence strategy around the business domain. So Sebastian, when you and I spoke briefly earlier, you mentioned that the business is what's, our job here is to run and understand the business well enough and the insights to your end user customers so that you can put in place a strategy around IT that can enable that capability set. So we see that wrapped around mobility, cloud, big data, and converged infrastructure, and all the elements of what's moving forward without leaving the legacy behind, is around this convergence of working on security from an end-to-end platform. And that's it. I wanted to make that very brief, and I think I'm ahead of time. So I would take any questions you have around anything around Dell software or Dell security, and if you don't have any, that's completely okay. Okay. Well, listen, everyone, thank you very much. I do have one last question for you, though, as part of this, is does the concept of converged security resonate with you? And if it does, can you raise your hand if that is something that you understand and you believe that's a very good positioning for how strategies around security should be covered going forward? So how many of you believe, and I can't see Baxter, if I see enough. Okay, that's great. So yeah, great. That's really good because we're trying to make sure that we're not confusing the marketplace, but at the same time, it just resonates with us because we believe the story that we can tell is around this convergence. But the other part is, if you notice at all the modular areas, is that your entry point of your gaps, it doesn't matter if your entry point is you don't have the ability to manage Active Directory passwords, or maybe you don't have the ability to manage your email security, or maybe there's a firewall. I'll give you an example because I have 7 minutes, and I will give back 5 minutes so you can get going. But if you think about a server, a 12G server, its throughput is extremely fast. Anything could be fast, but it's only as fast as the minimum latency to get to it. So when I make a request for something that comes externally, it's a web service request or some type of application request, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to want to have high performance throughput. So you look at a SonicWall firewall as an example. There's a supermassive that runs at hyper speed, right? So I look at that as threat protection at wire speed. But what that means for the entire experience of your end user is going from the point of the edge of the enterprise and checking the threats that exist all the way down into the server. The faster you can get your data request down into the application server that's running, the faster that server can start processing the requests that you have. So when you start looking at the latency points of applications, oftentimes you're looking at the gaps, and sometimes your security solutions also have to help accelerate that process of getting to the various layers of this infrastructure. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you Hope you really have a safe trip home. And I enjoyed watching and participating last night. And you have a lot of fun, and I hope to be in India again soon. Thank you very much.